Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Xena Warrior Princess, Season 1, Episode 5, The Path Not Taken. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So in this episode, we have basically a Romeo-Juliet situation happening with Agrenon and Xena, who are from two different kingdoms that have been feuding for centuries, and they've fallen in love, decided to get married, and put an end to this feud. However, there is a weapons dealer called Mezentius who basically stands to lose a lot of business because he's been funding the arms for these two warring countries that are now not going to be at war. And so he then kidnaps Jana and frames each of the kingdoms. So, of course, Jana's kingdom thinks Agrenon's kingdom's been the one to kidnap her, and Agrenon's kingdom thinks Jana's own kingdom is pretending to have kidnapped her so that they have an excuse to continue the war. And basically, war is imminent, about to break out. That is when Xena and Gabrielle enter a bar in this local area where Agrenon comes over to them and offers gold for Xena to get Jana back because he knows who's really behind it, as that's the only person who, Mezentius is the only one who stands to gain anything from kidnapping Jana. And so Xena agrees to rescue her, and she starts by infiltrating the mercenaries that are working for Mezentius, who happen to know her from her own warlording days, including Marcus, who is somebody that she had a relationship with in the past. And they sort of have this flirtation, and he vouches for her to Mezentius, but some of the other mercenaries figure out the truth that, Xena, she was like, oh, I'm helping the peasants to gain their trust, and then I'm going to backstab them one day. And, oh yeah, look at this. I ransomed a baby back to a king just a short while ago, which we, of course, having seen the previous episode, know she actually saved the baby, and that then comes out later. Marcus, while they're having their flirtation, reveals that he also tried to leave the warlording mercenary life once upon a time, but that he failed and came back to that life. Xena then is about to get Jana out of the area when Marcus finds out the truth that she actually has turned good, comes to confront her. She basically tries to talk him around to trying to be good again, telling him, just one good deed is the starting step, and then you just continue that, and it gets easier and easier as time goes on. A fight ensues. Marcus decides not to turn good and to call the guards. Xena fights them. Marcus then stops the fight by threatening Jana, which almost works, but then Mezentius comes in and is basically like, I'm gonna kill everybody in order to start this war. And he tries to shoot Jana, and Marcus has a last minute crisis of conscience, blocks the arrow, ends up with it in his heart, and ultimately ends up passing on. The last scene we see in this episode is the funeral for Marcus, which is most of the mercenaries walking with his coffin, and I believe it's Xena singing, though it's not shown on screen that she is the one singing, but it sounds like it should be Xena singing. We don't actually see the conclusion of Jana being returned or what happens with her and Agrenon, but assuming, given the nature of the show, that they do end up back together, wedding continues, peace ensues, but officially the last scene in the episode is Marcus's funeral. Which brings us now to our rankings, and we have not in first, but first we have our mostly objective rankings, which of course use set values to determine the score based on key storytelling elements, and then the personal ranking, which is based on entertainment and my own opinion. So mostly objective rank values, we have the single episode supporting character introductions, Mezentius, Jana, and Agrenon, which are worth 1 point each, making it 3 points. Then we have the multi-episode supporting character introduction, which is Marcus, worth 2 points, bringing us to 5. And then the multi-episode supporting character development. Marcus is killed by Mezentius, which of course is a big development for this character, and so I decided to count it for points as well. Also +2, that brings us to 7 total. Honorably mentioning, Xena and Marcus do have their flirtation, which would be a supporting relationship development, but then in the end, Marcus decides to betray Xena and calls the guards on her before ultimately dying before they can reconcile or anything like that, so that would have been supporting relationship regression. As it's +2, -2, I feel they cancel each other out, so I did not count them, but honorably mentioning, I acknowledge that it existed and it was there. And that brings us now to our negative points, which of course, negative messaging or behavior. We had kidnapping and framing. The criminal who basically, Mezentius kidnaps Jana and then tries to make both kingdoms believe that the other is the one who actually kidnapped her. That would be the framing part of things. And then, of course, we have murder, as Marcus ends up dying, which is a -4 points, because each of those negatives are worth 2. And kidnapping and framing, because it's both surrounding the kidnapping, I count it as 1 -2. Either way, 7 -4 is 3. That makes this a 3 out of 10 episode. Which brings us to the series ranking so far, and in first we have Sins of the Past, Dream Worker, Cradle of Hope, Chariots of War, and this episode is last, The Path Not Taken. And I assume The Path Not Taken is, of course, referring to Marcus trying to be good, failing at it, returning to being evil, betraying Xena to decide to stay evil, but then last-minute crisis of conscience to be good, but ultimately dying, so he cannot take that path. Either way, I thought this episode started stronger than it ended, in my opinion. Obviously, it starts with Gabrielle and Xena entering a bar, and it's hilarious to me because Gabrielle is completely oblivious to the fact that Xena is like literally beating up a bunch of thugs who are following Gabrielle and her around, and Gabrielle just thinks that, they always have an easy time getting a table. And then we once again have Xena kind of infiltrating and, echoes of her past with her connections to these mercenaries, her relationship with Marcus being rekindled because it's implied they had something in the past at one point, and the fact that like everybody knows her, the fact that, they also know her new reputation that's coming up, she has to lie about it. I did find it interesting how she was able to, you know, lie about it and infiltrate things and manipulate Marcus in a certain capacity. But here's the thing. I have very specific ships in the universe of Hercules and Xena. In the Hercules universe, I feel like Xena and Hercules, it's a shame they never ended up together. And I feel like Hercules with anyone other than Xena is meh. Meanwhile, on the Xena side of things, I think Xena belongs with Ares or Hercules, but mostly Ares in the Xena side of things, because I think a lot of the Hercules crossovers is post their little bit of flirtation in the Hercules universe, but Xena and Ares have amazing chemistry in the Xena universe. So I feel like any relationship that isn't Xena with Ares, or even Hercules to a secondary extent in the Xena universe is meh. So when she ends up flirting with somebody else, I'm kind of like betrayed in a way. And I don't find it as entertaining as I would otherwise because I'm like, this is not who I think she belongs with. Automatically not a great fit for her, automatically therefore not liking it. Um, and I also feel like ultimately with Marcus, I didn't feel enough connection to him to really feel it when he died, like empathetically or to. I don't want to say I didn't care because obviously he did ultimately make the decision to be a good person in the end, but it didn't really impact me. There was like no emotional impact to it. Um, And I felt like there was a bit too much time spent on the mercenaries infiltration side, not as much action on, like, usually in Xena there's multiple fights throughout the episode. And I felt like there was like one big fight at the end, the little bit of humor at the start with her, defeating the thugs that were trying to attack her and Gabrielle in the tavern while Gabrielle was completely oblivious to it. But, like the very first scene of the episode kind of establishes that this plot was going to be a Romeo and Juliet sort of thing, rescuing the lovers, and then I would have thought it would have ended with a wedding, which is what I would have preferred. Um, but instead, like halfway through, they kind of deviated and went, "Oh no, we're gonna have Xena have this little flirtation, and then person she's flirting with is going to die, and then reappear in the underworld in a future episode," which is why he is a multi-episode character. But I have to say, I would have probably preferred in this case them to have stuck to the original premise they established at the start, especially since just personal preference is I prefer when shows and episodes stick to the original premise they set up at the beginning because that is where they set my expectations. And when they subvert my expectations, I know some people like that. I personally don't. I prefer to kind of know where I'm going so that I know that I want to commit the time to going there. Um, Of course, I would have watched this anyways because I'm reviewing the whole series, but the point I'm making is I just don't personally prefer when my expectations are subverted. I prefer my expectations to be met instead. So I ultimately decided to give this a 4 out of 10 because I feel like it's very much on par with the previous episode that I also gave a 4, which was Chariots of War. So personal ranking, first was Sins of the Past, Cradle of Hope, Dreamworker, Chariots of War, and then I also put this one in 5th place, The Path Not Taken, though it does have the same numerical score as Chariots of War for me. And that ultimately brings us to the final series ranking so far. And on our mostly objective ranking, Season 1 has 32 out of 240, and on the personal side, 34 out of 240. But with that, we've rewatched and ranked Xena Warrior Princess Season 1, Episode 5, The Path Not Taken. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.